All right, final section of chapter 24, section 4, and this is America enters the war. This section is only about America entering the war and why we entered the war. And then chapter 25, we will start in and talking about the war itself in America in it. Now you have to remember, this has been going on for about a few years, 3 to 4 years, before we get involved. And during this time, the U.S. Tries to stay neutral. It tries to stay neutral on the outside, but ultimately, really, especially FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, the president, is a real big backer of Great Britain. And he's going to do everything in his power to help Great Britain. First thing that he chose to be neutral is the Neutrality Act of 1939. And it would be selling arms to warring nations for cash only. Okay? And also, those nations, those warring nations, had to come with their own ships to pick up whatever they bought from us. One, that means we are not getting indebted to a warring nation. And two, we do not put our ships at danger when transporting those items. Because remember, what happened in World War I? German U-boats sunk a lot of our ships. Now, the destroyers for bases deal, this is a way that FDR can help Great Britain without violating the Neutrality Act of 1939. So basically what FDR does with Great Britain and says, hey, I'll trade you 50 of our old destroyers if you give us the right to build bases on your territory in Canada and the Caribbean. Okay? He's not breaching the Neutrality Act because it's a trade. Okay? It's a trade. And he's not necessarily... so that's how he gets around that one. And then the Lend-Lease Act is he loans weapons to countries that are vital to our defense. Okay? So anybody who they feel is vital to keeping America safe, they will loan weapons to those countries. This is why, so a lot of the American public is big into isolationism. They do not want to be a part of this war. They still remember a lot of them remember World War I, and it's like, no, we're not doing that again. But this is how FDR justifies the U.S. involvement. He talks about these 4 freedoms in his 4 freedom speech. And he called for a world that needed to be founded on the freedom of speech and expression. You needed to be able to voice your opinion without being condemned and persecuted. Freedom of worship. You may worship any god that you choose, any way that you choose. You should have the right to do that. Freedom from want. There should not be a place in the world where people are in need of something and they can't get it. And also the freedom of fear. Freedom from fear. Those are the 4. And in this talk, he made it and he said the U.S. should be the great arsenal of democracy. So very much similar to kind of the way we are today. That arsenal of democracy, the policemen of the world. It really starts with his relative, Teddy Roosevelt, prior to him. Teddy Roosevelt, speak softly, carry a big stick. Policeman of the world. So this is kind of that continuation. And America is going to be deeply rooted into this idea. And it lasts until today. So again, U.S. sort of tries to stay neutral. But then we go with this hemispheric defense zone, okay? And he says the western half of the Atlantic is neutral, okay? So you're going from Great Britain, you're going from Europe over to America. Halfway through the Atlantic Ocean, you're going to go from the eastern hemisphere to the western hemisphere. Any Atlantic Ocean that's on the western hemisphere is going to be neutral. Now, there is a reason why he did this, okay? If he said that the western half of the Atlantic is neutral, then he has the right to put ships along that line to make sure that nobody in the war comes and invades them. Okay? But there was kind of a backwards thing that he was doing. He was also, with those ships on that line, he was able to see where the German U-boats were at. Well, why would he need to know where the German U-boats are at? Well, that way he could tell British merchant ships where they were at. See? It may look like he was staying neutral, but he actually was helping out the British. He was spying and seeing where they were at so he could help the British stay safe. Also, another thing, the Atlantic Charter. FDR and Churchill come together, set goals for a peaceful post-war world. The United States is neutral. They're not even part of the war. But still, FDR and Churchill get together and they start doing this. September 1941, Germans finally had enough and start bombing American destroyers. So let's think a timeline. If we know in history, we know that when is Pearl Harbor? December 7th, 1941. So December 7th, 1941, November, it's about 3 months prior to Pearl Harbor, the Germans have already started to attack us. They may not be on American soil, but it is American destroyers. So, Pearl Harbor, Japan. Well, while all of this is happening, Japan is over just going crazy building this empire in the Pacific, expanding into Southeast Asia. If you look on here, all of this red is what the Japanese Empire in 1942. Why do they need this big empire? Huh? We've talked about this before. Why? Well, look at, they're just a tiny little country. Yep, tiny little country. Little one.
Big China.
Little Japan. Yeah, they didn't have as much resources as the rest of them. And they wanted to be a world power. Well, how do you get the resources? Well, let's go. Let's go take over some worlds. Go take over some land. Get us what we need. Okay? So they're doing this. And, you know, the United States say, oh, we're neutral. We're neutral. But they say they're neutral, but they're making they're making treaties. They're doing other things that don't necessarily say that they might be neutral. Now, due to these kind of ways that we're doing things, we tick off Japan. Okay? So one thing, we restricted the sale of strategic materials to Japan so they could not attack British colonies in the Pacific. There we go back to, we are really helping out the British. So for one of these things, we're going to stop selling strategic materials to Japan. What was some of those strategic materials? A big one. Japan bought 80% of this from us. Oil. You need oil. You need a lot of it if you're going to win a war. And Japan got 80% of their oil from us. Okay? And we cut that off. We also sent Lend-Lease aid to China. Remember the Lend-Lease aid was? We were going to help anybody who was directly helps in our protection. Absolutely. We also froze Japanese assets in the U.S. And we send General Douglas MacArthur to the Philippines. You know, we're going to do this, but guess what? We're neutral. Yeah. You know what? I think we just said that, but everybody knew that we weren't. It was clear. We were we were pro-British, anti-Germany, and definitely anti-Japan. So we tick off the Japanese. How does Japan respond to U.S. actions? Yes, yes, yes. Right. Sorry, backwards. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. Japanese thought we were soft. Soft Americans would accept Japan's control of the Pacific after the attack. They believed that they could come in here, destroy our Pacific fleet. And they thought we were soft enough to say, all right, you know what? You destroyed our fleet. Fine, whatever. It's not a big deal. you can have whatever you have. Be a world power. You know, we definitely underestimated the Japanese and the strength at that time and how they came in and they showed us, you know what, we are something to be reckoned with, and we just destroyed your Pacific Fleet. But guess what? Did the Japanese underestimate these soft Americans? Oh yeah. They may have totally crippled us for a while. They may have got a ginormous victory over us at Pearl Harbor. But did that last long? Absolutely not. Let me get you some information here. 3,500 Americans were killed at Pearl Harbor. The attack wrecked 2 U.S. Navy battleships, 1 mine layer, and 2 destroyers beyond repair, and destroyed 188 aircraft. The intent of Pearl Harbor. The attack at Pearl Harbor's intent was to strike. The strike was to protect Imperial Japan's advance into Malaysia, so protect that, and into the Dutch East Indies, and for their natural resources such as oil and rubber, by neutralizing the U.S. Pacific Fleet. They believed that if they knocked this Pacific Fleet out of the war, it would take months, if not years, for the United States to regroup and be strong enough to go in and attack in the Pacific realm. But the cool thing is, I can't give you a certain time, and I know there is. It's incredibly fast that we get turned around, we rebuild our fleet, and the next thing you know, we're knocking on Japan's door. We're island hopping, and we're making our way closer and closer to Japan. So Japan definitely underestimated these soft Americans because it didn't take us long to regroup, to be better than ever, and coming back at them. December 8th, 4 days after Pearl Harbor, U.S. declares war on Japan. 3 days after that, Germany and Italy declare war on the United States. December 11th, 1941. Why Germany kind of jumped on? Well, first thing, Germany and Japan were tight. They also thought that Japan would beat us pretty quickly, and then Japan would help the Germans fight the Soviet Union. So kind of some interesting stuff, but yes. And there's a little, newspaper article. Hitler Mussolini joined Japan in World War upon America. So, as we know, lots of lives are lost on both sides. But ultimately, we come into the war. We're on both sides. We're in the Pacific War against in World War I, and then in the European one. So, yep. We are done here. You may go and you may answer your questions, your 3 questions for this section, and then next week we will get deep into World War